Early this year, I reviewed what I view as a criminally underrated game, Donkey Kong Jungle Climber. And as mentioned in that video, I reviewed that game over King of Swing, mainly because I wanted to look at something more sentimental and familiar. But now I've got the itch to revisit King of Swing because, in all honesty, I've not really played this one much. Despite being the predecessor to what I think is a fairly solid game, I've not touched this one past maybe a playthrough and a half. And all I really remember from it is the graphics and the fact that it's an understandably more primitive version of Jungle Climber. So I thought I'd refresh my memory of the game while also letting you guys know if I think it stands up to the sequel, so let's get into it.
As I mentioned just a second ago, one of the things that immediately sticks out to me, and probably you guys also, is the look of the game. Regardless of what you may think of the game itself, the graphics in this game are great. They're by no means some technical marvel, by GBA standards or otherwise. But they're just so bright and colourful, and I'm a sucker for colourful games. The sprite work is really pleasant on the eyes with the almost pastel look of everything, having a calming effect because of how warm and soft things look sometimes. While you could definitely argue that the pre-rendered Cruncher style graphics the sequel went for are better, this game in my opinion looks just as great and actually feels like more of a thing of its own since, as I just said, Jungle Climber bases its entire style off of the SNES classics while this one has a look completely its own. Something that also sets it apart from its successor is the fact that it goes for more of a Mario approach to worlds and levels. You have a water world, an ice world, a jungle world, you know, the classics. It's definitely not a bad approach, but it does feel kinda generic at times, which isn't helped by the fact that the levels themselves are all very short and pretty barren. I feel like they did try, but this game definitely relies on the gimmick of using the shoulder buttons to climb, rather than pushing for more creative ways to utilise the gimmick.
I think one of the things that really shine through upon revisiting this game is the fact that it feels like more of a proof of concept than anything. It feels like it's laying the foundations for something greater in the future, but doesn't really offer enough on its own. Also, I'm sorry if it annoys you that I keep comparing this game to its sequel, but I feel like it's kinda needed to understand how this game ticks. Especially because it was so much that was changed or improved in the sequel. Take for example the controls.
In this game to jump, you hold down the trigger buttons and then let go once DK goes red, but in JC you could just press A like in any old game, which while on paper doesn't sound like a massive deal, during gameplay it can definitely throw you off. So you may be asking yourself what the A and B buttons do. Well, if you press the A button you get a short period of invincibility at the cost of some of the bananas you've collected, and if you press the B button, you get one of your free hearts replenished, also at the cost of your bananas. Beyond that, the game largely plays the same in terms of controls. However, there is one thing that tripped me up despite the familiar controls. Perhaps it's just me, but despite the game being a short and easy time, for the most part, there were some areas that really gave me some trouble, and I think it's due to the level design. This game is laid out fairly well, and in some respects, is better than the follow-up in how it forces a player to engage with enemies more often than not, rather than giving the player the chance to dodge or skip enemies entirely. This is definitely a good thing, but it, along with the slightly less polished controls, gave this game a tighter feel and led to a lot more deaths than in the DS game for me. Although maybe that's just because I'm not as acquainted with this game. Moving on from the general gameplay stuff, I've got to touch on the soundtrack. Once again, this is another thing I prefer in the follow-up. Yes, I know at this point I should just marry that game, but hey, I've got to be honest, ain't I? But anyway, the soundtrack is pretty good. There's a remix from one of the country games on here and it's pretty solid and stands on its own as a song, putting a bouncy little funk in the step of the old song. In fact, a lot of the soundtrack has a bit of a funk and a bit of a groove to it. It's a really fun sound overall and really helps give the levels some much needed life, even if the same tracks are used over and over again. Oh, I almost forgot, there are some collectibles in this game too. Past the standard old bananas you have crystal coconuts and medals, both of which help you unlock a bunch of cool stuff like new games and characters in the Jungle Jam mode. The Jungle Jam mode is basically a minigame mode, featuring stuff like climbing races and free-for-all fights. It's a really smart way to use the game's pre-existing formula and add some replay value to it, even if it's not by much. Jungle Climber has its own minigame modes, which I forgot to mention in my review of it because I'm great at my job, and while I think the concepts for the minigames in that game are a lot more interesting, the ones in King of Swing are good for what they are.
Okay, I spent the entire video sucking off Jungle Climber, so try my best to remove that game out of my mind. Is King of Swing a worthy enough game to experience either on its own, completely independent of the sequel, or even completely independent of the franchise as a whole? Despite its shortcomings, I'd say so. It's very likely to become your new favourite game or anything like that, but I think it's charming enough and fun enough to enjoy either as a DK fan or just someone who wants to check the game out because it seems interesting. While I'd always recommend Jungle Climber over this game, especially if it's a gameplay style that interests you, I don't think you could go wrong giving this game a shot. Also quickly, just before I go, one quick thing. I've got a massive project I'm working on, so it's probably going to take away a lot of time from uploads, or at least regular uploads. I'm going to try doing it in a load of big chunks and then kind of bring it all together, and that's going to require a lot of time and energy, so I don't know how much time I can dedicate to reviews or rants or anything like that. So uploads may be a little sporadic for a while. I'm going to try and maybe remain consistent with a couple of smaller uploads or smaller reviews. So I'll see what I can do, but yeah, I'm not going to guarantee, I can't guarantee for the next maybe couple months I'm able to upload as consistently as I want, but I'm going to try my best. But yeah, that's all I've really got to say. Anyway, I'll talk to you guys later. Peace.